I don't know anybody that lives in Pennsylvania.
It's weird.
Okay. We're all back.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. Ooh. Someone has. Julia, can you try?
I'm not typing. What, you want me to mute myself again?
Myself, come back. Can you use headphones or turn the volume down? You can mute too, but that'll okay. Hi everybody. Welcome to this week's Learning Space. My name is Nicole Galucci. We have a whole panel of speakers to talk to you about some really cool stuff with early childhood astronomy. So as usual, you can join in the conversation. You can ask questions, leave comments using the Q&A app. So that is wherever you're watching. There should, I think it's here. It might be here. I don't remember where it is on the screen. But there's a little yellow button that says "Join the conversation," Q&A, and that'll take you to the Q&A app. If you're seeing the Showcase app right now, you can toggle back and forth between Showcase and Q&A to ask us questions and participate. I haven't actually opened that yet, but I'm sure we have our friends Nancy and Guido already saying hi in the Q&A. So hello. There's usually also some chatter going on over in the comment stream of the event page. I don't normally check that during the show, but there's some really cool conversation usually going on there as well. So check that out if you're watching. Welcome everybody, and hi Georgia.
Hey Nicole.
Georgia through the wall. We have a whole panel of people here. I'd like to have them each introduce themselves really briefly. Alice, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Alice Enevoldsen. I'm currently mostly affiliated with myself, which is Alice's Astro Info. But I've done a whole bunch of work over the last 5 years or so with early childhood education at Pacific Science Center. And then I've also been working with Anna over at the Astronomical Society of the Pacific with some of their early childhood stuff.
Cool. Anna?
Hi. I'm Anna Hurst from the Astronomical Society of the Pacific in San Francisco, and we're currently in the midst of a 4+ year NSF-funded project called My Sky Tonight, in which we are developing a set of astronomy activities for 3 to 5-year-olds for use in science centers and children's museums around the country. And right now we're in the activity development phase. We're working with some researchers, and a couple of them are here with us today, as well as a team of museum educators. So we have a great team that we're working with, and we're certainly learning a lot. At the ASP, it's a new audience for us. We've been doing astronomy education for a long time, but not with this age group. So it's great to have a team of experts who understand how to work with the little guys.
Sounds good. Jennifer?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Gypson. I'm fighting a cold, so that's why I sound like this. But I'm faculty. I'm an associate professor in child development at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, California. And my research looks at how young children learn about the world around them in the context of family conversations and interactions with family. And a lot of what I've been exploring is young children's curiosity and inquiry in things that adults think of as science. And so astronomy is a topic that I'm very much involved in right now, working with the ASP on this grant, the My Sky Tonight grant. But I've also done some work in children's understanding of robotics and biology. Thank you.
Julia?
Okay. I think I'm unmuted now. Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Julia Plummer. I'm an associate professor at Penn State University in science education. And my background and training is in astronomy. I did my PhD in astronomy education. So the breadth of my research has been looking at how students learn astronomy with a strong focus on learning that starts with our own Earth-based observations and looking at how students' understanding of astronomical concepts and the practices of science and astronomy develops over time. So my research now it's looking at preschoolers, but I've looked across elementary, middle school, high school, into college-age students, but all within this realm of learning about astronomy.
Very cool. Awesome. And I wanted to share a quick anecdote the other day. So we work for Georgia and I work for a STEM research education and outreach center, and just the other day they had a gaggle of toddlers or preschoolers in our resource center. They were testing some science inquiry activities. I don't think any of them were strictly astronomy based, but I was asked to go photograph them for our STEM center, and I was incredibly excited to do that because they were so Alice, we'll get started. I asked you originally to talk about this topic because of your article in Sky and Telescope about toddlers at the telescope. And in fact, if you guys are looking at the Showcase app, I've got a link to a follow-up from that article on Sky and Telescope that has a bunch of resources that you can look at. So why don't you tell me a little bit about just the topic in general from your article?
Okay, yeah, so that article sprung out of the fact that I have my own toddler now. She's 3.5, so I guess she's technically into the preschooler range now. But I ended up being kind of frustrated about a few things, about like the number of books that were available for very young kids, like ages 2 and under, about astronomy, because I'm an astronomy geek, so that's what I wanted to share with my daughter. And I couldn't find a lot. I could find like Goodnight Moon, find any of those cool space books that start a little bit older. Maybe age 4 or so is when those books really start to explode, and then they have tons and tons of them. And also, I really wanted to share looking at the night sky with her, which is very easy without any magnification. But of course, we pull out our telescopes. Yes, in Seattle, we do pull out our telescopes now and then. And I wanted her to be able to look through them. My experience over the last almost 20 years of hosting star parties and being the person at the telescope who's helping people look through the telescope is that kids under about the age of 7 just don't get anything out of looking at the telescope. They can't figure out how to put their eye up to the eyepiece. They can't figure out what they're supposed to do. They bang their heads into things. They grab on to it because they're trying to steady themselves. It's just nothing. And then once they're finally sort of lined up, they pretend they see what you've asked them to see, because they've already exerted all this work, and they can tell it's important to you and to their parents that they see something. So you say, "Do you see Jupiter?" And they say, "Yeah, I do." And you say, "What color is it?" And they say, "Purple." And you're like, "Well, you're not looking at it." Just because it's very hard to physically look through a telescope. And I also remember the first time I learned to use a microscope, it wasn't taught to me as a skill. The microscope was pushed in front of me in middle school, and they said, "Focus on this slide." And they showed me how to use the focuser, but they didn't show me how to look into the microscope and what I was looking for. And so I wanted to see if there was a way that we could scaffold very young children into looking into the telescope, because teaching skills is very, very doable. Like there's tons and tons of research. You can teach almost any age person to do almost any skill. It depends a little bit on their motor coordination, but you know what? You can teach skills. That's a very doable thing. So I started thinking about what it is about a telescope, and I realized that the paper, like the toilet paper tube binoculars, are just perfect, because you need to look through them just like you need to look through the telescope. And as soon as you realize that you need to look through the telescope, it becomes much easier to use. And then the limitations have to do with being very well lined up. So hand a kid a paper towel tube or a toilet paper tube, and the first thing almost all of them do with it is they put it up to their eye and they look through it. Like, it's just a natural thing to do with a tube. So you give that to them, and then you say, okay, now look through this telescope.
Okay.
They just looked through something, so it's it's very natural to go, oh, look, another tube. This one has glass in it, but it's still a tube. And then the other thing that I recommend the other major thing that I recommend in my article is that you use really wide eyepieces with a very wide apparent field of view. Like, you want as much glass at the top of the eyepiece as you can possibly get, because that eliminates the need to have to be exactly lined up. And those of you who've helped audiences look through telescopes before and have looked through telescopes yourself, like, the more magnification you add on there, like, the tinier the thing is, and the more you have to be lined up, and everything has to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And what I was going for was, let's just look through a telescope and enjoy it and have fun. So I put a big eyepiece in there, not much magnification, nice wide field of view, and we look at things like the moon and Jupiter that are very bright. And it's just so easy. And I've had tons of success with this. And I think that with a couple of these tools, that age 7 cutoff for using the physical tool of the telescope isn't there anymore.
That's great. That's great. I remember using the 6-inch refractor, old 1800s telescope at UVA, and have it set perfectly, and little kids come up to it and they're like, boop, they move it down to their eye, because that isn't apparent. And I love the toilet paper tube idea. So what about this project My Skies Tonight? Jennifer, or any of you that want to chip in, what was the kind of the impetus for this project, the My Skies Tonight project?
Anna, do you want to take that one, since it came to the ASP first?
Sure. So we have been working with museums and nature centers, parks for close to a decade now. We have a program called Astronomy from the Ground Up, where we provide professional development and activities for informal science educators who want to do more astronomy in their venues. And we kept hearing from that audience that they were getting a lot of really young visitors, and they weren't really sure what to do with them. So we were seeing more and more of a need for really good quality materials to reach this age group in that informal setting. So that we just decided we wanted to pursue that path. And we also recognized that it was not an age group that we had much expertise with. We have, a whole slew of excellent astronomy activities that we've developed over the years. That's kind of our forte, but not for this age group. And so we saw that we needed to team up with Jen and Julia, and also Maureen Callanan from UC Santa Cruz, who all have done research into how children learn about science and sometimes astronomy and space in particular, as well as a team of educators who work with this age group regularly. So we're locally in the Bay Area. We're working with the Lawrence Hall of Science, the Children's Discovery Museum in San Jose, and the San Luis Obispo Children's Museum. We at the ASP are lucky we get to go and play at those museums and try out the activities that we're developing. So that's how it all started, and we're about halfway through our 4-year project, so we're still very much in the development and trying out new ideas.
Cool. So Jennifer, and maybe Julia as well, what is so different about teaching science to these very young children as opposed to teaching science to elementary school or higher?
Well, for me, it's more of engaging children in the process of scientific inquiry, so figuring out what they're curious about and supporting that curiosity. I'm less concerned with the specific pieces of content that they might take away than engaging their interest and helping them to identify themselves as kids who like science, kids who enjoy exploring and discovering. And not having worked with, older kids very often, I think that the pressure is off at the preschool age, because you really just get to just dwell in their enthusiasm and help support that and ignite their interest, versus what I perceive to be happening in school systems where there is a little bit more emphasis on content. I think Julia could probably speak to that.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Jen said, that there's a couple of differences that we're looking at here. One is, we're working with preschoolers instead of older children, and so it's a sort of a constant evaluation of what kind of experiences might they be bringing with them. How do we use those experiences? What are things that might be brand new in this that they will need support on? These are not words that they've heard, but it doesn't mean they can't learn them. So, figuring out, and there's, our project is aimed at 3 to 5-year-olds. Well, 3-year-olds aren't all the same, 5-year-olds aren't all the same, and there's big differences between there. So our work is really constantly, wrestling with all of that diversity in our audience. And then there's, of course, the important aspect of formal visit versus informal. So our project is about creating experiences, designing experiences that'll work in informal settings, museums, science centers, nature centers, parks, places where audiences can come and go as they please. So we're not planning for a particular group that will stay with us over time. So that's a different way of thinking about audiences than formal classroom science planning, where you're like, well, the first time I see them, I will just learn who they are. I will find out what they know, and I'll plan from there. We're planning for, maybe this is it. This is the 30 minutes that those kids are going to engage with this. What can we do to get them maybe taking that next step after they leave the museum?
Yeah, and I think that, oh, go ahead, Georgia.
I was just going to ask, so are you looking at activities that currently exist and trying to modify them, or are you kind of going for something totally different and creating your own, special activity from scratch with the program?
Anna, do you want to take that since you're...
Yeah, we're doing both. We are definitely we're seeing what's out there and what's working. A lot of, we're taking some inspiration from the activities that we have for older kids and seeing if we can adapt them to work for this age group. We definitely don't want to reinvent the wheel, but in some cases we are starting from scratch. There's a lot of activities out there that people will use for the younger age group without really considering what is developmentally appropriate. So we're really testing out the materials. How do I want to say it? We're testing them out and working, again, going back and forth with our researchers and the educators to make sure that they're adapted to be really developmentally appropriate for that age group. And so a little of both, adapting and starting from scratch.
And we didn't just jump into activity development without doing our front-end research. So we looked at kids in this age range from 3 to 5 years, and we tried to identify the kinds of things that they're interested in and the ways that they approach doing science. So some of that front-end research was looking at existing literatures, and some of it was data that we actually collected. Just to give you an example, sometimes when I tell people about this project, they say, preschool kids in astronomy, really? Is that really even a relevant science domain for them? So we thought we needed to get some evidence on that. And what Maureen Callanan and I have done is a diary study in which we ask families to document for a period of 2 weeks all of the conversations that they're having with their children about nature. We just say nature. And we collected all of this information. We collected it with a variety of different populations of families. And we found that of the set of conversations they reported across all of the different populations that we looked at, astronomy-related talk was about 20% of the conversations. So right there we're like, yes, kids are interested. They're talking about the sun, the moon, the stars, shadows. this is a relevant topic to be pursuing for this age group.
And these were fairly unprompted questions? They were coming up with it on their own?
Yeah, they were coming up with them on their own, and they were coming up with them in ways that were embedded in their everyday experience, things that they were noticing out in the world or when reading books, a variety of different types of contexts. I will say, though, that 40% of their conversations were about animals, so that's definitely, you know, at the preschool age, they're very interested in animals.
Oh, yeah, especially if they have one in the home.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We have a question that kind of relates to that family tie from Nancy Graziano. How often do you engage the kids' parents in various activities, particularly when it comes to continuing to engage their kids at home? So you talked a little bit about their speaking with the parents. What about with the activities as well?
I think that's a critical part of our activity development. We're constantly thinking about the multiple settings in which the activities we develop might be used. And one of those settings is going to be maybe drop in, stumble upon activities in the floor of an informal learning space. And in that context, we really want to engage the parents. And so we're trying to provide activities where there's entry points for parents to take a role in engaging with their children rather than sitting back and letting a facilitator just take over and run the activity. So Anna, you've been doing some of this. Do you have any particular examples of how that's been working?
Let's see. Okay, sorry, I thought I was muted. Sure. So let's see. What's a good example of that? One of our favorites is building a space explorer, where we put out all kinds of recycled materials and just doodads and ask the families to design a vehicle of some sort that can explore another world, and we give them some of the features of that other world. And this is one where we're actually working on the best way to encourage families to. So we really like this one, and we've got it pretty fine-tuned, but we're working on how to get families more involved and work together to design a rover that has certain tools that will work for a certain planet. Another one another activity that has been working out really well since the beginning is called Bear's Shadow. We start out reading a book, Moon Bear's Shadow by Frank Ash, which is about a bear that goes fishing and his shadow scares the fish away, so he spends the rest of the book trying to get rid of his shadow, burying it in a hole or nailing it to the ground or running away from it. And over the course of the story, you notice, without the story calling it out, the sun is moving across the sky, and his shadow is gradually moving as well. And then in the end, he gets to catch the fish, and his shadow catches the fish too. And so then we have a tabletop activity where we're exploring the apparent motion of the sun. That's the high level of what we're going for, but really for the kids, it's experimenting with shadows and how if you change the position of the object or the light source, that changes the shadow. And this is one where we've gotten some great parent interaction as well. We have some cards with some challenges. Can you make the bear have a long shadow? We give them a flashlight and a little bear figure and a little scene, and we ask them, can you make a long shadow? Can you make the bear's shadow touch the fish in the pond, or hide in the shade of the tree? And we've gotten some really great parent interaction with that, where they help their kids work through how to make those shadows.
Yeah, that's an important aspect of a lot of family science projects, and we've talked about that previously on this show, is that when we say family science, we don't just mean drop off your kids and have them do science with us, right? It's get involved too, which is really important. We have a question that I missed from a few minutes ago, but we touched on this a bit, but maybe we can expand a little bit more on this. This is from Sylvan Westby. What's more important early on, or what's the general angle of attack? And he offers things like awe and wonder, learning and memorizing facts, or learning to apply critical thinking. Maybe you can touch on how much those three aspects get worked in with early childhood.
I'll go ahead and start on that. So the three were kind of that wonder, maybe that ties in with interest and engagement, identity. learning facts and more factual-based knowledge, and what was the third one was?
Thinking.
Critical thinking. Yeah. So I'd say that for those perspectives, like for us, we start with maybe identifying something conceptual that we're working towards, but that I don't think really defines how we're judging success. You know, our goal is not that they're going to learn a bunch of facts, but that we want to figure out what might be an important astronomical phenomenon that they can explore. And so then it becomes more on those other two pieces, having them become interested in it so that they'll want to continue more, and they're able to explore their own interest in it. And then to me, the critical thinking piece ties in with one of the aspects that I'm most interested in is their engagement in science practices, because this is now learning about the process of science, and which will allow them to further their own learning. So in the example that Anna gave, Bear Shadow is a great example, because while they may learn some critical pieces of science along the way, they're doing that through their own investigation. They're experimenting. They have a model. The flashlight is the sun and a bear, and they are, through their own observations, testing, well, how can I change the shadow? How can I do this? Which is, I think, far more critical for this age group, for them to learn how to do science than you've got to do both. You've got to learn some conceptual science along the way, but the how-to, I think, is more valuable. How to look through a telescope is more valuable than knowing, oh, I can, there, you know, now I see the rings of Saturn, you know. It's that process that they're engaging in.
And I think that cycles back to the person who had the question about parent support and parent engagement, because I think that sometimes parents are hesitant in the domain of astronomy because they doubt their own content knowledge, but parents can support their children's sense of awe and wonder, and parents can support their children's inquiry practices or the scientific practices skills too. So it's really an entry point for the whole family for both of those.
Yeah, and something I wanted to say is I think at the preschool age we almost want to use all of those as angles of attack, because preschool is when you're laying foundation and you're doing building blocks of all of those things. I'm not a big memorization of facts person. I tend to be all inquiry and process and critical thinking and let's bring art into it kind of person. But there is this preschool age, they're doing the sponge thing with their heads, and they love to learn facts and hear new words and learn to say those new words. So I think that at this age, although that's not the emphasis that we need to have, where they need to come out with a lot of that, we don't need to avoid it, because it's part of the things that we need to know. They need to have some awe and wonder. They need to have some facts and know some of the vocabulary of science, and they need to have those critical thinking skills. So in preschool, we're beginning on all of those, and it's later on in school that we solidify that. But right now, we need to start on every level.
This is something that the new, sets of science standards in the U.S. are trying to emphasize, are these science practices, and so maybe we can tie a little bit into how are you preparing them for these science practices. In particular, I think Alice, you talked about having a pre-K sort of standards for to go along with that.
Yeah, I did an exercise. I was talking with some of my daughter's preschool teachers, and they were being told by the director of the school that they needed to put more science in their classrooms. And I said, oh, let me look at your lesson plan, and I'll help you figure out a few ways that you can integrate more science into your classroom. And I looked at their lesson plans, and they were full of science. And I went, why do you need me? And I realized that they were having difficulty recognizing that there was science in their lesson plans and recognizing what counted as science. And so in addressing the issue of what counts as science for preschoolers, I looked around at all of the standards that are available for early learning, the the standards about like 0 to 3 guidelines and Washington State standards, because that's where I am. And there isn't very much science in them at all. There's a little bit of we have seasons and a little bit of farm animals, but pretty much other than that, it's talking about, the standards are talking about social skills and motor skills and pre-reading and pre-writing, a little bit, and pre-math, but not a lot of pre-science either. And so since they didn't have what I was looking for to point to out to preschool teachers as this counts as science, and this counts as science, and this counts as science, and if you're being told to do more science, do one of these 6 things. I went to the NGSS, because the next generation science standards, because I've been studying those, and they're new and they're awesome and they're really hard to read. And I took the lowest level of those and started pointing out how you could begin to address those topics at a preschool level. So not in such a way that I think that we should be applying NGSS to preschool, because I don't think that's appropriate, and I'm not even sure that we need science standards for preschool. But I think a guideline for teachers who don't know what counts as science would be helpful. That the process of science is something that counts. And so I took the NGSS and I sort of turned it into bullet points for the early learning, the like K2 stuff. Turned it into bullet points, and I said, this is how this would look if you were starting to address it in a preschool classroom. And this is a topic that's related to this that you could do, so that kids sort of have some exposure before they hit that in kindergarten. Not saying we need to go through all of them and things like that. So that's what I did. I made this document for preschool teachers. It's still pretty dense because the NGSS is really long.
Yeah.
And that I'm not sure. I mean, it depends on the preschool teachers, but the ones that I've been exposed to who don't already know science, the document that I have is still a draft because I think it's too dense and too intense for someone who's maybe afraid of science or doesn't know what counts as science.
Mm-hmm.
But where else are you going to say, here's where you can start?
Kind of the beginning of that learning progression through the standards.
Right, because
Yeah.
the NGSS is organized around that concept that we should think of learning as just increasing steps of sophistication, so that at preschool, they're already pulling in some of they already have ideas and observations, but they're still starting to pull together. And the other thing that the NGSS focuses on is a fusion of content and practice, so that we shouldn't be teaching science, like inquiry skills separate from content, that you learn those things together. So I think it's an entirely appropriate way to say, right, what do these really high level things talked about in the NGSS, what does that look like as early learners start on the pathway?
So we have an interesting question from Nancy. Again, it's asking, it's kind of 2 parts. If you've seen in your research or with these activities, is there any significant distinction in level of interest between boys and girls at this age? And the second part of that, what about parental support? Do you see parents pushing more on either girls or boys for this, for science?
I don't think we have the research evidence yet to say definitively, so probably what we could share is anecdotes or impressions, but we are gathering that research, so we're videotaping family interactions at all of these activities and analyzing them on a variety of different verbal and nonverbal measures. In the time that I spent at the San Luis Obispo Children's Museum observing and doing this data collection, we didn't see, and we did some quick, what we call blitz coding, so really fast turnaround information, and we weren't seeing that the activities themselves attracted boys more than girls, girls more than boys, nor did they seem to hold boys longer or girls longer at this age. These kids were all equally enthusiastic. The parent question, I think, is something more subtle that we would actually have to be looking at those videotapes to really explore. And there is precedent for for research on young children's engagement in science in a museum setting where parents have sometimes been shown to offer higher levels of science explanation to their boys than girls, and this was in physical science domains. And it was something that we were able to alter at the San Jose Children's Discovery Museum by creating exhibits and activities that kind of explicitly invited families and girls to participate. And by doing that, the difference in parent talk to boys and girls evaporated.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's very exciting.
Yeah.
We have some Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say one of my I was very worried about that because during one of my lessons all the girls ended up leaving very quickly and the boys stayed with me the whole time, so I was wondering if that was because of the activity or what. And then the next time I did activities, all the girls stayed with me and all the boys left. And something I've been noticing, and again, this classroom, is that the kids are starting to move in groups now. They've started to, instead of doing side-by-side play, they're starting to have groups of friends. And those tend to be gendered groups of friends. So there's a group of girls and a group of boys and a group of girls and a group of boys. But it's not girls against the boys, and it's not entirely that way. So I think that what I was seeing on those days was that a certain group was staying with me, not that the boys were staying with me or the girls were staying with me. It was that the group was staying as a social cohesive group, and then they would leave as a group. So again, that's anecdotal, and so I think Jen's got a lot more that she's got, especially of being able to make that change disappear. That's really cool. But I would say I was very worried that first day that I was only talking to little boys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting, and I'd like to know
So how it was
more
just
about
completely.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if I cut anybody off. I was going to ask more about the data that you guys do collect, and how do you, what do you use to sort of tell yourself that, yeah, this activity or this feature of this activity is successful and we're going to kind of develop that further, or this is something that isn't working? You mentioned, some video and some observation. What else do you guys do to sort of get that information for yourself?
I think it's interesting because sometimes the data that comes from the videotaping leads to a conclusion about the success of an activity that ends up not really being appropriate to motivate further activity development. So let me just give you an example of an activity that we've abandoned called the Sky Window. And in this activity, parents and children were invited to sit down and make basically a frame. One side was blue, the other was black, and they could glue different sky-related items to either the day side or the night side. And the data from the videotaped observations suggested that this was really successful. They stayed a really long time. There was a lot of conversation about astronomy-related activities. But at the heart of it, our educators just thought that it was worksheety and not engaging the science practice skills that we're very, very committed to supporting in these contexts. So Anna can speak more to this because she's really the one having to find the balance between data and actually creating good activities for this purpose.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, so there's a lot of information we're collecting. We have the data from our researchers and also just their expertise in knowing what other research is out there and making sure that we're keeping that in mind as we're going forward. We try out the activities ourselves, often at Lawrence Hall of Science, but also the other local museums we're working with. And then we already created the first pilot version of this set of materials. And we held an online workshop for around 20 museum educators around the country earlier this year. So the workshop will be a component of this project as well. Anyone who receives the materials will also receive training. And that first pilot group has been testing the materials in their museums. Alice was a part of that group as well. And so we're getting feedback from them on the activities also about how does it really work in a museum setting. We want to make sure, first and foremost, that these are engaging activities that the educators will use. And then make sure that these engaging activities incorporate those science practices and are developmentally appropriate. Because if they include, you know, great science, if they're just going to sit on the shelf and collect dust, then that was a waste of our time. So we're really trying to balance and go back and forth, check in with the researchers, check in with the museum educators, try it out ourselves, and just see what kind of feels right when we try it out. And there's a lot of back and forth and really good discussion and healthy debate among the members of our team. I wanted to mention the Sky Window because I said that Alice was one of our a member of the pilot group, and I was chatting with her when she happened to be visiting the Bay Area recently, and she had tried that one out, and she made some adaptations to it and actually really loved it. So we may not have completely cut it. I want to go back and
demonstrate our cyclical process.
Maybe try out some of the
with Alice.
Yeah, I might want to try out some of the things that she changed to that. I don't know if Alice looks like she maybe froze. But,
frozen.
But I think if I could build on that, I think Anna hit on an important point. Part of our understanding and our, you know, as we you know, collect data in various ways on this, part of it is around how are these activities implemented in different spaces. So different choices that different facilitators make, or you know, because it comes to how they're implemented, is going to make a big difference. So that's one of those really interesting tensions that we have. Is it the activity, or is it some other peripheral things that make the difference? And so depending on what variable we're looking at, you know, well, conceptually it's fine, but it's not engaging. But maybe it would be if we did this other thing. So.
And it's a cyclical process, so I think all of this reflects the idea that we come back around from development to research, back to development. And, you know, maybe Alice's adaptations are amazing because Alice is amazing, you know, and then we're going to try that with a bunch of other people who are facilitating and see whether or not, you know, there's kind of a similar enthusiasm on the part of the kids.
Yeah, unfortunately, Alice dropped out. As we're talking about her behind her back. Yeah, she showed that activity at Geek Girl Con. That's a very, very kid-friendly sci-fi fantasy convention in Seattle, and so she brought that to our astronomy panel and showed it off, and I thought it was really cool. I think a lot of the parents in the audience liked it as well.
So not abandoned.
Not abandoned.
I thought it was well used. It allowed, like, you know, it's like one of my favorite things that I saw happen in one of the workshops that we did. I'm working with Discovery Space, Pennsylvania, here in State College, and earlier in the workshop, the educator showed the children pictures of the day and night sky. One of the pictures was of the daytime sky with the moon in it, and there's like these 4 little kids looking at this image, and you know, one of the boys, he's like, "It's the daytime sky," and this little girl, 4-year-old girl, is like, "It's the nighttime. That's the moon." And you know, and so they engaged in a very evidence-based discussion where different children were pulling in the different features of the image to make their claims at day or night. And in the process, I think they convinced the 4-year-old girl that, well, the moon can be up during the daytime as well. Because later, when she made her moon frame, on her day-night sky frame, she put the moon on the daytime sky and said the moon can be in the day. So we could see how her thinking was progressing through this social engagement around, you know, key astronomical phenomena.
But let me just read you this from the diary study to remind you that we are working with 4-year-olds. This is an example that we've been using about the moon in the daytime sky. So this is a 4-year-old girl, and she says, what is that circle in the sky? That's not the sun. And the mother says, it's the moon. And the child says, but it's not nighttime. And the mother says, the moon rises early sometimes before it's dark. And the child says, naughty moon, it needs more sleep. The sun's going to be mad at him. Right? So preschoolers, they might be making these observations, and I think that's really important that they're noticing this, but the explanatory frameworks that they're applying might be really unexpected to an adult who's not prepared for how developmentally appropriate it is for the children to be anthropomorphizing things like the sun and the moon.
It's so fascinating. Yeah, they're kind of storifying their observations and their experiences, and I'm sure that's probably what makes them so powerful as young kids, when you get those impressions and you are learning about your world and you don't even realize it, but you incorporate it in and then it just stays with you. And so it sounds like a lot of fun, and it sounds like a really great challenge to take a activity like the sky window, and then it shows some real promise in some ways, but maybe it's not quite what you're hoping for in other ways, and so then there's that fun challenge of trying to maybe, save it and make it what it really could be at some point. Fantastic.
Yeah, we've really learned the importance of leaving room for fantasy and play and explanations like that. Yeah. And it's something we always have to remind ourselves of because we want scientific accuracy, but play is so important at that age. And I was just, I know there's some photos and a short video, and I was thinking about this idea of how, the Build a Space Explorer is an example of an activity that we knew was really engaging, but we want to make sure that it is also, incorporating those science practices. And so it could be just a craft activity, and we know the kids will love just making a craft where they glue a bunch of stuff together. And how do we relate that to astronomy and space science? So we want to make this a sort of an engineering activity where they have a purpose in mind, and they're choosing tools and thinking about what is a tool and tool use, and building this spacecraft based on a certain purpose. We know that not all the children are going to do that, but we're hoping to design the questions and the introduction such that a certain portion of the kids really do engage those sort of design practices. And I have it. I don't. You can see if the video works. There's a short clip of a boy from a summer camp at the Lawrence Hall of Science where he's talking about the Space Explorer that he designed.
So as you guys know, I typically have problems with audio and piping audio into the video, but I'm going to give it.
Let's see if it works.
So yeah, you guys tell us in the comments or in the Q&A if it's working. The people in the Hangout may not hear it, but the audience should be able to hear it.
Okay.
Have an objector of what this you send the things back to Earth.
Oh, an ejector to send things back to Earth?
These are the wheels that can roll on, and these are the cameras, and these are the solar panels.
Solar panels, good thinking.
And this is what to hold this thing up.
So that was Duncan, and he was explaining what all the various tools were on his Explorer. Sometimes the kids glue a bunch of stuff together and then come up with what they are later, and that's okay. That's valid too. We're playing around with it a little more to see if we can get some of them to actually have a purpose in mind ahead of time and choose their doodads to be tools to serve those purposes. So that's one that we know is engaging. We're going to keep that one, and we're just fine-tuning how to make it a really solid science and engineering activity for this age group.
So I couldn't hear any of the audio. What kind of things does he say in that video? Do you remember?
Oh, what did he say? He showed the solar panels. Was there a grabber?
So I'm gonna hold something up.
Yeah, to pick up samples.
There was an ejector to send things back to Earth.
Yeah, little catapult type thing. So he was even thinking about, okay, I'm on another planet. I need to communicate back to Earth. So it was very thoughtful. And they had introduced it, giving some examples of actual spacecraft and rovers, and pointing out some of the tools that they used and what their purposes were. So they had some examples of what kind of things they might include.
Very cool. And I'm getting comments from the audience that they did hear it. So
oh, great.
I'm not blowing up my computer this time.
I was able to hear it.
Yeah, I could hear you.
You guys all heard it?
Yeah.
I'm the only one. Okay. Good to know. I will be writing up these instructions for future. Last time I blew up my computer. Do you want me to show a couple of the other pictures? Because there's some super, super adorable.
Sure. That'd be great.
Let me get screen share started. Here. Okay.
So that is Ellen at the Lawrence Hall of Science, Ellen Blinderman. She's amazing. It's been great working with her, and she's really skilled at working with this age group. So this is using ultraviolet sensitive beads, and talking about the sun's energy and sun safety, wearing your sun hat and sunblock. And she actually starts out by telling a story with a couple of dolls about the dolls go to the beach, and they each have a little beach bag, and they put on their hat and sunblock, and then they make the bracelets and go outside and notice how they change, and the kids get really excited about that. The next one is
looks like some astronauts.
Yeah, this is moon sand, where they are pretending that tub of sand is the surface of the moon and acting out what the astronauts might be doing. And this gives the kids get engaged just because they want to play in the sand, but it gives a chance for some good one-on-one discussion about what it might be like on the moon and why astronauts need special equipment. And then we also have a life-size version of Visiting the Moon.
Oh my God, this is adorable.
Where we create a moonscape and put on special boots and gloves and air packs, and they make their own space helmets. And here's an example of where we're really getting into a lot of imaginative play.
They got sponges on their feet?
Yeah, those were our special moon boots, although we're moving away from that particular model because there was a lot of tripping. So we're trying out those sort of hospital booties that you just put over your shoes. The special boots. That's our
less bouncy.
Next iteration, right? And putting in the foam underneath that sheet. So that was actually just a few shots of a couple of activities. I wish I had a shot of Bear's Shadow to show you. I had a video, but it ended up being too big.
Yeah.
So just a couple of shots of some of the activities that we're working on.
Very cool.
We're also working on a night tent where we have a little dark space with glow-in-the-dark stars and the sound of crickets and nighttime animals, and using that to talk about constellations. We're working on a flower cratering activity. That's one of the newer ones we're working on, where there's an example of a classic astronomy education activity, right. But how do we adapt that to be really appropriate for this age group?
Yeah. I'm really curious how that turns out, because I brought that activity to Geek Girl Con in 2013, and a lot of little kids are just like, hands and flower.
Yes. And that's the challenge, because they just want to dig into it. So we're also working on how to simulate the surfaces of other planets and talk about, rocky planets versus gas giants. We're thinking about maybe using some shaving cream, so I'm excited for that one. That one will be messy.
Fun.
And I think I just want to add to that, Anna, is the activity development process is also bottom-up. So we're not only looking at kind of traditional things that might be done and adapting them for this younger age group. I think, in fact, that more of our conversation has been, what are the kinds of activity settings in which this age child is engaged, And how can we build on those play routines to incorporate astronomy-related content? So we have, like the kinetic sand or the moon sand activity is an example of that. That comes from a routine that kids really enjoy, and we're layering in some astronomy-related content to that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great strategy.
So one more question from Nancy. What venues are already offering these programs, or what kinds of venues? Maybe you can comment on your dissemination plan for these activities and these lessons.
Sure, these are designed for use in museums and science centers. So right now, our first pilot set of activities went out to about 20 museums and science centers, and that's really just to get their feedback. We will have the next pilot version 2, will be coming out early in 2015. So we're going to have another online workshop. So if there's any museum educators out there who are really interested in trying out our next set of materials, there we go, there's the dates. That'll be March 2nd to April, what is it, 18th?
It says 10 on there.
April 10th,
Okay.
yes. March 2nd to April 10th. We don't have the application up yet, but you're welcome to send me an email. My address is there, ahurst@astrosociety.org, if you're interested in participating. And again, that's a pilot workshop, so we'll be asking if you sign up for it, you'll get a free set of materials, and we'll in exchange be asking for you to give your feedback on those materials and participate in some of the research that Julia and her colleague Michelle are doing about how the educators incorporate this into what they're doing and what they learn from the workshop. And then the final version we'll be releasing in the fall of 2015, and then we'll be distributing it to museums around the country. We'll have a series of workshops, so if you sign up for the workshop, you also get the materials. And they'll be online workshops, so you can participate remotely.
Very cool, very cool. Do we have any last comments, particularly on the science and mixing of science and play, the emphasis on play at this age, maybe for this age group? Anyone want to take that?
Jen, you're muted.
Oh, you're muted, Jennifer.
Sorry. I would just say that is at the forefront of our thinking, because we know that play is learning in this preschool age period, and that thoughtfully guiding children's play can really kind of shape the ways that they're engaging in those learning processes and the kinds of things that they're learning. So we're not trying to remove play from the equation. We're trying to build the opportunity to consider astronomy in play.
Very cool. Yeah, when I was in the resource center, they were doing I mean, if you just walked in not knowing what was going on, it looked like they were just little tiny kids playing with things all over the place. But they were engaging in inquiry into different, they had like diffraction gratings, and they had slinkies, and they had dominoes, and they were having a good time. They were clearly playing and having a good time, but figuring some things out as well.
Yeah. And something I would say is especially if you're skeptical of whether or not play is actually learning science, is that there's a lot that you can do just by inserting good questions into the play. And this is one of those major shifts for me about the difference between playing in the sand and calling it the moon and playing in the sand as a model of the moon. It's a very subtle difference in wording there, but the difference for me as the teacher or as the parent who's guiding that is the questions that I ask. The kid starts off playing the same way, whether they're just playing or whether we're talking about it as a model, but then I ask, or the teacher asks questions that sneak into their brain and turn it more into a model. And that's the cool part.
Very cool, very cool. So I think we're about ready to wrap up. Thank you all for sharing this project and sharing your experiences. This is a topic we'd certainly like to revisit in the future. We've got some other groups that are doing great stuff in early childhood. And I know this is something that's actually come up in our journal club, Georgia. We talked a bit about science across the board in early childhood education. So this is a hot topic. Some brief announcements for you guys. Actually later today there's a Hangout. It's 4:30 my time, so it's 2:30 Pacific. figure out the I can't do that in my head. The cast of the movie Interstellar. So Fraser's been sharing this Hangout. I don't know if anyone we know is involved in hosting it, but the cast of Interstellar is going to be talking about the movie on a Hangout on air in a couple of hours. So that's really cool. Check that out if you can. Friday afternoon at what time? Noon Pacific. I think it's 19 UT. Check Fraser's page, but the weekly Space Hangout will be wrapping up on Friday afternoon all of the news in space and astronomy from this week, which will be a lot less somber than last week. Last week things were pretty rough right before the broadcast, so we talked a bit about that, or talked a little bit about that. And then Monday is Astronomy Cast with Fraser and Pamela Gay, and then back around on Wednesday we'll be learning space again. So feel free to email us, educate@cosmoquest.org, if you have any questions from the shows or anything like that. This video will be posted up on YouTube. It'll be up on the event page for all of eternity, however long the internet is, and the audio will be up on 365 Days of Astronomy. We'll put all the links in the show notes and all that fun stuff as well. So thank you guys so much. Thank you to Alice and Anna and Jennifer and Julia for talking to us about My Skies Tonight and early
and a great project. Sounds like so much fun. Really great.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Georgia.
The opportunity.
Yeah, sounds like it was a really, really cool proposal to write, too. You guys have a lot of... That's where my brain is right now. You have a lot of aspects.
We worked for a long time together developing it.
It's a great project.
That's excellent. Well, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next week on Mind Space.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.